Brenda's laughter, sharp as glass, echoed through the church hall as she slipped her arm around another man's waist. My stomach dropped, the untouched potluck casserole suddenly tasting like ash in my mouth, leaving me numb and exposed under the flickering fluorescent lights. "Some men just aren't built for ambition, Roy," she'd whispered, her eyes cold, before turning back to him. The pale morning sky stretched over Harvest Hills, a wash of muted grays and nascent blues. From the porch, the air smelled of damp earth and distant wood smoke, a quiet rhythm far removed from the sharp metallic tang of old memories. The farmland rolled out, orderly rows of stubble awaiting spring, a landscape of calm which never quite settled the tremors within me. My hand, still bearing a faint scar from a forgotten skirmish, rested on the cold railing. This was the peace I'd chased, the quiet life. It felt fragile today. A yellow post-it note, stuck to the refrigerator with a hummingbird magnet, caught my eye. "Client meeting in Lakewood, back late," Brenda had scrawled in her elegant, hurried script. Another day, another solitary existence in this house built for two. The quiet settled deeper, pressing in on me. In the living room, the coffee maker hissed to life, its gurgle a familiar sound. I watched the dark liquid drip into the carafe. Brenda used to admire my quiet strength, the way I could be still and observant. Now it seemed she sneered at it, calling it stagnation. The marital drift had started subtly, a series of late-night texts she shielded from my view, unfamiliar wine bottles appearing on the counter, and the increasingly glamorous clothes she bought for conferences. Betrayal, I knew, left scars deeper than flesh, wounds that festered in the quiet hours. I found myself staring at the coffee table, a knot tightening in my chest. A half-drawn curtain let in a thin strip of morning light, illuminating two wine glasses. One, a delicate crystal, bore the faint imprint of Brenda's berry-colored lipstick. The other, a sturdier, broader glass, was clean. My breath hitched. "Am I losing my mind, or is she cheating under my own roof?" I muttered, the words barely audible. The question echoed, a cold, hard stone sinking into the pit of my stomach. My heart began to pound, a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. I walked to the bedroom, the floorboards creaking beneath my weight. The bed was made, the duvet pulled taut. The hamper stood empty in the corner. No used sheets tossed carelessly inside. This was unusual. Brenda rarely stripped the bed on a weekday morning. My phone felt heavy in my hand as I snapped a few discreet photos. The untouched hamper, the pristine bed, the small, unsettling details. Evidence. For what? I wasn't yet sure, but the need to document felt urgent. Later, as I was hosing down the porch, my neighbor Susan approached, her silhouette framed by the rising sun, a carton of fresh eggs cradled in her arm. "Hey, Roy," she called out, her voice cheerful. "I saw a fancy black sedan out here the other morning. It wasn't your wife's car, was it?" She cocked her head, her gaze sharp, full of that particular small-town curiosity. I kept the hose moving, aiming the water at a stubborn patch of dirt. "Probably a visitor from her office," I lied, the words feeling dry in my throat. "Client must have stopped by early for something." Susan nodded slowly, her brow still furrowed with a flicker of concern before she turned and continued down the path. Brenda returned hours later, the click of her heels announcing her arrival before I saw her. She moved with an unusual urgency, her hair slightly disheveled, a flush on her cheeks. As she passed me in the hallway, a small slip of paper fluttered from her purse. She snatched it up quickly, her movements almost clumsy, but not before I caught a glimpse of the embossed letterhead, Redwood Hotel Lounge. That evening, the silence at the dinner table was thick, heavy with unspoken accusations. I tried to make conversation, asking about her client meeting. Brenda speared a potato on her fork, her jaw tight. "Stop prying, Roy," she snapped, her voice brittle. "I'm tired of your interrogation." She pushed her plate away, the scrape of ceramic against the table a jarring sound, and stormed off to the bedroom. The blinking red light on the landline caught my attention. New voicemail. My finger hovered over the play button, a cold dread washing over me. I pressed it. A man's voice, deep and smooth, filled the quiet kitchen. "Brenda," he began, a possessive ease in his tone, "about tomorrow's suite at the Redwood Hotel." Let's finalize details. Call me. The air grew thin around me. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone, pressing record, holding it to the landline receiver. The man's voice, now captured, played again in the recording. "She's definitely involved with someone else," I whispered. The sound a ragged whisper. "In Redwood is the meeting spot." The confirmation hit me like a physical blow, leaving me breathless. Sleep, when it came, offered no escape. Nightmares, vivid and cruel, clawed at me. I was back in the dust and heat, my comrade's face twisted in betrayal, the flash of a knife, the sharp pain as the blade left the scar by my eye. Then his face morphed, became a stranger's, then Brenda's, her eyes cold as she turned away, walking into the haze. I jolted awake, the taste of ash in my mouth, the room still dark around me. The early morning light, still muted, found me awake before the alarm. My mind, despite the restless night, felt unnervingly clear, sharp with purpose. In the utility room, I took down my hunting rifle, a Model 700, from its rack. The ritual of cleaning it, the slow disassembly, the precise application of oil, the careful reassembly, was a familiar comfort, a way to channel focus. Each click of the bolt, each wipe of the bore, calmed the raw edges of anger. It wasn't for violence, not yet, but for truth. "I'm heading upriver," I told Brenda over breakfast, my voice steady, betraying nothing. "Way up past the old logging roads. Might be gone most of the day. Depends on how the trout are biting." It was a plausible story, a common Sunday activity for me, providing a solid alibi for my planned surveillance. She barely looked up from her phone, just offered a distracted, "Okay, honey, have fun." Out in the garage, I went to work on the truck. The small, high-resolution camera, no larger than a thumb, was meticulously affixed to the passenger side mirror housing, angled just right to capture the driver's side of vehicles I followed. The GPS tracker, a flat magnetic disc, clicked securely onto the underside of the bumper. Lessons from Cairo resurfaced, crisp and precise. "Evidence, not emotion, Roy. Evidence is proof. Emotion gets you killed." This wasn't a battlefield, but the stakes felt just as high. Brenda emerged shortly after, dressed in a tailored navy blue pantsuit, her hair meticulously styled, a new silk scarf tied elegantly around her neck. She looked like she was heading to an important corporate meeting, not a small-town real estate deal. "Wish me luck," she said, giving me a quick, almost practiced peck on the cheek before she climbed into her sedan. I watched her pull out of the driveway, waiting until her car was a distant speck before starting my own engine. I kept a comfortable distance, letting 2 or 3 cars separate us on the highway. The drive was uneventful, the Midwest landscape rolling by. Then, in the bustling outskirts of the nearby city, I watched her indicator flash, her car turning into the sprawling parking lot of the Redwood Hotel. The confirmation, a cold, hard fact, landed squarely in my gut. The voicemail had been true. I parked a few rows back, near a delivery van, affording a clear view of the lobby entrance. It wasn't long before I saw her. She walked through the revolving doors, her head held high. A well-dressed man, his suit expensive, his silver hair neatly combed, stood waiting. He was tall, mid-50s, with an air of practiced confidence. She smiled, a genuine warm smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months, perhaps years. He took her hand, a gesture of intimacy, his thumb brushing her skin. Their body language, even from this distance, was unmistakable. No client meeting, not like this. My camera whirred almost silently, capturing them. I watched as he put an arm around her waist, guiding her towards the elevators. They leaned in close, sharing a whispered laugh before stepping into the lift, the doors sliding shut. The knot in my stomach tightened, cold and hard. I drove home, the evidence burning a hole in my pocket, the images replaying in my mind. The internet became my new battlefield. A quick search for Redwood hotel developer and prominent real estate in the nearby city yielded immediate results. Paul Miller, his face smiling confidently, appeared on various company websites and local news articles. Paul Miller, a prominent married real estate developer, CEO of Miller Properties. The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture I hadn't wanted to see. My phone rang. It was Brenda. Her voice was light, almost cheerful. Honey, my meeting ran late. Just grabbing a bite with some colleagues. I'll be home in a few hours. Take your time, I replied, my voice steady, calm, the words tasting like ash. No rush. The bitter taste lingered. I downloaded the video footage to my computer. The frames played, crisp and clear. Brenda and Paul, their smiles, their touch. I watched it repeatedly, the raw emotion of the morning slowly giving way to a cold, clinical detachment. Anger was a luxury I couldn't afford. This required precision. Confronting Brenda now felt premature. I needed more leverage. Paul Miller. He was the key. He had more to lose. I decided to confront him first, away from Brenda, to gauge his reaction, to see how easily he would break. My research deepened. Paul's family, wife, 2 college-age daughters, his business, major projects across the state, a reputation for integrity, vulnerabilities. Everyone had them. Always know your enemy's vulnerabilities, the old instructor's voice echoed in my head. A business dependent on public trust, a family he presumably cared about. I meticulously began to plan my approach. Not a direct confrontation, not yet. An accidental crossing of paths. His office building, his favorite lunch spot, the charity gala he attended every year. I needed to pick the right moment, the one that would yield the most. For 3 days, I became a shadow. I tracked Paul Miller to his gleaming office tower downtown, observing his routine with the same methodical precision I'd once applied to hostile environments. I noted his arrival time, his usual coffee shop, the restaurants where he conducted power lunches. He was a creature of habit, predictable, which made him vulnerable. I wanted a public setting, but one intimate enough for a private conversation, away from the prying eyes of his staff. On the 4th morning, I found him at the Daily Grind, a trendy coffee shop near his office building, nursing a latte and scrolling through his phone. I approached his small corner table. "Mr. Miller?" I asked, my voice calm, controlled. He looked up, his brow furrowed in polite confusion. "I'm Roy Jensen." The name landed like a stone. I watched his face closely. The confident tilt of his head stiffened, the easy smile dissolving into a thin line. A subtle flush crept up his neck, and his eyes, moments before filled with casual distraction, now held a flicker of recognition, then apprehension. Can I help you?" he managed, his voice losing some of its smooth timbre. "I believe you know my wife, Brenda," I stated, my gaze unwavering, holding his. I didn't blink. Let him squirm. He tried to bluster, a practice move, the kind of deflection a man in his position would use. "Your wife, I'm not sure what you're implying, Mr. Jensen. I meet many people through business." He adjusted his tie, a nervous gesture. "I'm implying you're sleeping with her," I said, my voice cutting through his pretense, flat and factual. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a single, discreetly folded photograph. It was a clear shot, taken from my truck, of him and Brenda, laughing, entering the Redwood hotel suite. I laid it on the table between us, face up. The color drained from his face, leaving it pasty. The arrogance, a thin veneer cracked, revealing genuine fear. He glanced around as if expecting someone to suddenly notice us. "Look," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "This is a misunderstanding. She told me she was separated, that you two were already done." He pushed the photo back towards me with a trembling finger, as if it were contaminated. "Did she now?" I asked, a glint in my eye, watching him sweat. "Funny, I don't recall signing any papers, nor did I pack my bags." My statement hung in the air, a cold weight. He swallowed hard, his gaze darting from me to the photograph and back. Then desperation. "Look, I'm a reasonable man. I'm sure we can come to an understanding. What do you want? Money?" He leaned forward, his voice low, conspiratorial. "Name your price." I scoffed, a quiet, humorless sound. "This isn't about money, Mr. Miller, not for me. This is about what's right." I picked up the photograph, folding it carefully and putting it back in my pocket. "You're a public figure, Mr. Miller, a family man, 2 daughters, I believe, prominent real estate developer. Miller Properties relies on a certain image, doesn't it? His jaw tightened, his eyes wide with alarm. What are you saying? I'm saying, I continued, leaning slightly closer, my voice dropping to a near whisper, that if this arrangement with my wife doesn't end today, then your reputation, your family, your business will all suffer a rather public downturn. I'm very good at collecting evidence, and I'm not afraid to use it. I met his gaze directly. I suggest you consider your next move carefully. He slumped back in his chair, visibly shaken. The bravado was completely gone. I, I understand. I'll cut ties immediately. His voice was barely a whisper, defeat heavy in every syllable. I nodded once, a curt dismissal, and stood. He watched me go, a defeated figure amidst the cheerful morning chatter of the coffee shop. As I walked out, I knew it was a hollow victory. He'd agreed, but the lingering fear in his eyes, the quick offer of money, told me he was still a man capable of deception. This battle wasn't over. It was merely a skirmish. I returned home, the short drive filled with an unsettling quiet. Brenda was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner. She moved to me, wrapping her arms around my waist, laying her head against my chest. Her touch, unusually affectionate, surprised me. You seem different, honey, she murmured, her voice soft. She mistook my quietude for weariness, my steely resolve for exhaustion. Just tired, long day, I replied, my voice flat, holding her loosely. I wondered if Paul had already called her, if the threads were already beginning to unravel for her too. Days bled into one another, marked by a hollow normalcy. Brenda moved through the house with a practiced ease, but her fingers were often busy, tapping on her phone, then quickly tucking it away. Furtive calls, snatched whispers in the next room, the sudden silence when I entered. Paul Miller, it seemed, was a man of weak promises. My truck's GPS tracker confirmed it. Brenda wasn't headed to Lakewood. She was driving to a secluded cul-de-sac in the next town over, a place tucked away from the main roads, a quiet residential area perfect for clandestine meetings. He broke his promise, I thought, a cold certainty settling in. That old saying, once a cheater, always a cheater, echoed in my mind, but it was Brenda's audacity, not Paul's weakness, that sharpened my focus. In the dead of night, I worked swiftly. A tiny, voice-activated recorder, no bigger than a quarter, was hidden beneath the driver's seat of Brenda's car. Another, smaller device was taped discreetly behind the nightstand near her phone. My old skills, once used to track targets in urban mazes and dusty back alleys, now served a different, more painful purpose. This wasn't about catching an enemy, it was about catching a ghost of the woman I thought I knew. The recordings, when I listened to them, were damning. Fragments, mostly, but enough. Paul, my husband, suspects nothing. Her voice, light and dismissive, punctuated by a short, almost giddy laugh. Another time, Roy is so predictable, honestly, it's almost boring. The words twisted in me, not with rage, but a chilling realization of her contempt. Brenda, perhaps emboldened by her perceived success, became increasingly bold. A silk scarf, not mine, left on the back of a chair. A strange, unfamiliar cologne scent lingering faintly in the air near her side of the bed. It was as if she was leaving a trail of breadcrumbs, almost daring me to discover them, testing the limits of my quiet observation. She treated me like a fool. The betrayal deepened, reaching beyond the marriage vows, striking at the very core of trust, unraveling years of shared history. Then the burner phone, tucked deep in a zippered compartment of her purse, a cheap, disposable device. My hands, usually steady, trembled slightly as I extracted it. It contained a trove of explicit messages, photos, candid, intimate shots of her and Paul. The depth of her deception, captured in pixels and text, was undeniable. This was no casual fling, no momentary lapse. This was a deliberate, ongoing, intimate affair. One evening, over a silent dinner, I tried an indirect approach. It's funny, I praised, pushing peas around my plate. How easy it is for people to lie. To themselves mostly, but to others too. It just eats away at everything, doesn't it? Trust, honesty. Brenda set her fork down with a sharp clink. Her eyes, usually so composed, held a defensive glint. Why are you so obsessed with lies, Roy? she snapped, her voice tight. Is your past making you paranoid? Not everyone is out to betray you. I met her gaze, maintaining my poker face. Her words, intended as a jab, merely confirmed her own guilt. The chilling calm that had settled over me deepened. She had no idea how close she was to the truth or how much I already knew. I secured all the evidence, the voice recordings transferred to a secure drive, the photos and explicit messages from the burner phone copied and backed up, the Redwood hotel receipts I had carefully retrieved from her discarded handbag. Everything. Organized, dated, irrefutable. I confided in no one. The isolation, a familiar companion from my military days, now felt heavier. I wrestled with the ethical implications of my own surveillance, the intrusion into her private life. But she had made her choices. I was simply reacting to them, preparing for the consequences. I began to draft a legal strategy, outlining my assets, her assets, the best way to move forward. The next step was a call to a lawyer, a specialist in divorce. I want everything clean, I would tell them. No loose ends. The time for a direct confrontation with Brenda was imminent, but it would be on my terms. Not a wild outburst, but a carefully orchestrated reveal. The evening began with a semblance of peace, a quiet dinner for two. I'd made Brenda's favorite, a simple pot roast, the scent of herbs filling the kitchen. The table was set with careful precision, the cloth napkins folded, the wine breathing in its decanter. It was a calm, almost serene trap. I watched her across the table, her casual smile, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. This was the last dinner we would share like this. As we finished the meal, the last forkful of potatoes sliding down, I reached under my chair, an unassuming manila envelope. I placed it gently on the polished oak table, sliding it across to her. The weight of it, the quiet thud, was louder than any shout. We need to talk, Brenda. Her smile faltered, her eyes narrowing slightly. She picked up the envelope, her fingers tracing the unmarked paper. What's this, Roy? She asked, her voice tinged with irritation. More of your paranoia? I said nothing, just pushed the burner phone, small and dark, across the table. It slid to a stop beside the envelope. Who is Paul Miller, Brenda? The color drained from her face, leaving it stark white. Her eyes darted from the phone to my impassive face. That's not mine, she stammered, her voice thin, reaching for it. I pulled it back, just out of her grasp. Then I pressed play on a small digital recorder I held in my palm. The tinny sound of her own voice filled the quiet dining room. My husband suspects nothing, she chirped, followed by that dismissive laugh. Her face crumpled, then hardened. Tears sprang to her eyes, but they quickly turned to fury. You spied on me? She shrieked, pushing her chair back, the scrape a harsh sound against the floor. You're sick, Roy. How could you? You broke your vows, I stated, my voice flat, devoid of any discernible emotion. The words felt heavy, final. You broke me. She tried to turn it around, a desperate, familiar tactic. You've been distant, cold. You pushed me away. What did you expect? Her voice rose, laced with self-pity and anger. That doesn't excuse your choices, Brenda, I replied, my gaze steady. I pulled out the neatly folded Redwood hotel receipts from the envelope, laying them flat beside the burner phone. Lies, deception, behind my back. This isn't about me pushing you away. This is about you walking away. Her posture softened, the anger dissolving into desperate tears. She reached across the table, her hand trembling. Please, Roy, I love you. Remember how we were? Our early days? We can fix this, honey. We can. Her voice was a pleading whisper, a desperate attempt at manipulation. I pulled my hand back. Brenda, I said, my voice quiet, cutting through her pleas. I know Paul Miller is married. You're ruining his family too. That's when her facade crumbled completely. The sobs racked her, raw and uncontrolled. She admitted to it all, between gasps and choked excuses, the words tumbling out in a torrent of confession. The affair, the deceit, the lies. Still the excuses continued, like a desperate attempt to paint herself as a victim. I watched her. A profound sadness settling deep within me. The woman weeping before me was a stranger, a caricature of the vibrant, honest woman I had married. The image of her, broken and exposed, brought no satisfaction, only a deep, weary ache. "It's over, Brenda," I said, the words heavy with finality. I slid the last document across the table. 2 copies of a formal separation agreement alongside divorce papers already drafted by my lawyer. I had signed them earlier that day. "You have 24 hours to leave." If you're listening, you understand that life has a way of presenting us with costly choices, ones that force us to redefine everything. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. 24 hours. Brenda left with a small travel bag, the wheels clicking on the porch steps, echoing loudly in the sudden, chilling silence that descended upon the cottage. Her sedan pulled out, gravel crunching, and then nothing. Just the vast, empty quiet of Harvest Hills. I stood in the doorway, watching the dust settle, a strange relief mingling with a dull, devastating ache in my chest. The house, moments before filled with the tension of her presence, now felt vast and hollow. I walked through the rooms, each object a ghost of what had been. Her side of the bed, unslept in, her favorite armchair, now just an empty piece of furniture. The scent of her perfume, faint now like a fading memory. I felt no remorse, only a grim, quiet determination as I began the systematic removal of her belongings. Her clothes, her toiletries, her books, all collected, sorted, boxed. Each item severed another thread, making the break cleaner, sharper. The silence was a conduit to the past. Flashbacks, once fleeting, now pressed in with brutal clarity. The desert compound, the scorching sun, the informant, his face veiled, his words twisting truth into a lie. The sudden ambush, the chaos, the sharp pain as shrapnel tore a path near my eye, leaving its permanent scar. This pain is familiar, I thought. The familiar ache of betrayal, sharper now, more personal, yet rooted in the old wounds. My tactical approach to Brenda's infidelity, the surveillance, the evidence, the cold precision, it wasn't just a reaction. It was a coping mechanism, honed in combat, applied to my own living room. Control, evidence, precision. I began to sell off shared assets, systematically cutting ties. Her expensive jewelry, the antique clock she adored, the second car. Each transaction was a quiet declaration of independence, a way to secure my financial future, to rebuild on solid ground, alone. Days later, Susan, my neighbor, appeared at the door with a freshly baked pie, her brow furrowed with concern. "Is Brenda gone, Roy?" she asked, her voice gentle, her eyes scanning the driveway for the familiar sedan. "I haven't seen her car around." "Yes, Susan," I replied, my voice steady, my face giving nothing away. "She's gone for good." I offered no further explanation, and Susan, sensing the wall I'd built, simply nodded, leaving the pie and a sympathetic look. The need for counsel, for a sounding board, led me to an old contact. Jed, a grizzled ex-military operative, a man who'd seen more than his share of human ugliness and still found a way to laugh. He had been a mentor in my early years, teaching me the finer points of strategy and survival. I called him on a secure line, his voice raspy but familiar. "Jed," I said, recounting the bare facts, stripping away the emotion. "I'm in a different kind of war now." I told him about Brenda, Paul, the deceit. He listened, silent, his occasional grunt the only sign of his presence. When I finished, there was a long pause. "Control the narrative, Roy," Jed finally advised, his voice low and firm. "That's always rule number 1. And protect yourself. Always." His words, stripped of sentimentality, resonated with the hard-won lessons of my past. While packing her things, I found a hidden box tucked beneath loose floorboards in her old crafting room. Inside, a stack of leather-bound journals. Brenda's journals. I hesitated, then opened one. Her elegant script filled the pages, revealing her true feelings, her growing contempt for my quiet life. "Roy is a cage," she'd written, "a dull existence. He lost his edge, just sits there, collecting dust." Another entry, "I need excitement, passion, something more than this predictable farm life." Reading her words, a cold anger settled over me, not a furious heat, but an icy resentment. Her dissatisfaction ran far deeper than I had imagined. rooted in a fundamental disdain for the life we had built. It wasn't just about Paul. It was about her. I used this information not to forgive, but to understand her motivations, to strategize my next moves. The divorce was merely the beginning. Brenda and Paul, they hadn't just betrayed me, they had mocked me, and I decided they would truly pay the price beyond just a divorce. The morality of it weighed on me, a heavy, quiet burden, but the resolve held firm. The divorce proceedings began with a swift, cold efficiency. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Eleanor Vance, moved with surgical precision, leveraging every piece of evidence. The recordings, the photographs, the burner phone data, the hotel receipts, all laid bare. There was no argument, no room for denial. The outcome, as Eleanor predicted, was decidedly in my favor, though the cost, emotional and otherwise, still felt immense. But divorce was only one part of the equation. Paul Miller needed to face consequences beyond a scorned wife. During my initial research, I had uncovered whispers of dubious business practices, minor ethical breaches disguised as clever maneuvering. Nothing directly illegal, but enough to tarnish a reputation built on perceived integrity. I anonymized the information, meticulously packaged it, and sent it to a local business watchdog group, along with a few carefully chosen, well-placed online forums. The leaks were subtle, deniable, but effective. Soon, articles began to appear, questions were raised, and Paul's previously rock-solid business deals started to unravel. His reputation, once pristine, now carried the faint but persistent stench of impropriety. The financial strain I knew would be significant. Brenda's turn came next. The burner phone, full of its explicit messages and photos, needed to be discovered. I waited for the opportune moment when she had left her purse unattended in a common area at her office. An anonymous call to her HR department, a vague tip about misuse of company property and time for personal, illicit activities. It was enough. Within a week, the news came. Brenda was terminated from her position, citing unethical conduct and misuse of company resources. Her career, once promising, was now severely damaged, a black mark on her professional record. She showed up at the cottage door a few days later, her face blotchy, her eyes red-rimmed and furious. "You did this," she shrieked, slamming her fist against the doorframe. "You ruined my life." I looked at her, my voice flat, calm. "You chose your path, Brenda. I merely cleared the obstacles." I felt no anger, only a quiet, resolute finality. The anonymous tip about Paul's affair, delivered with cold precision to his wife's private email, landed hard. Mrs. Miller, a woman with her own considerable family wealth, discovered the truth, the evidence undeniable. She filed for divorce, demanding a hefty settlement, citing marital infidelity and public humiliation. Paul Miller's empire, already under siege from my initial leaks, now faced internal collapse. Paul himself tried to confront me once, pulling his car up to my mailbox as I collected the mail. His face was a mask of rage and desperation. "What the hell are you doing, Jensen?" he snarled, stepping out of his luxury sedan. I simply held up my hand. "Stay away, Miller," I said, my voice low and steady. "Remember what I told you. I still have evidence, and my lawyer is very good. Try anything, and you'll find yourself in deeper trouble than you can imagine." He glared, his hands clenching, but he got back in his car and drove away, the threat understood. I felt no joy in any of this, no triumphant surge, only a grim satisfaction that justice in my own way was being served. The world had rules, unspoken and sometimes harsh, and they had broken them. I consulted with Eleanor, my lawyer, ensuring every step I had taken was legally defensible, airtight. She assured me it was. Clever, she called it. Precise. Brenda, stripped of her job and her comfortable lifestyle, struggled to find new employment. The whispers followed her, the small-town gossip, the damaged reputation. She was facing the harsh reality of her actions, alone. I started the process of divesting myself of the cottage, the house that held too many ghosts. It was time to move away, to truly start fresh, unburdened by the past. As I packed boxes, the line between justice and vengeance blurred, becoming indistinguishable. I found little solace in either. Jed called one evening, his voice rough. You did good, kid, he said. You survived. I hung up the phone, looking out at the darkening fields. I didn't feel like I'd survived. I felt like I'd merely endured. The divorce was finalized, a stack of legal papers marking the official end of 2 decades. I received a fair settlement, enough to be comfortable, enough to ensure my future. Yet there was no triumph, no surge of satisfaction. The closing of that chapter felt less like victory and more like an exhaustion that settled deep into my bones. Brenda's life, I heard through the quiet currents of small-town gossip, had indeed spiraled. She found herself working a low-paying job in a discount store in the next county, a stark contrast to her corporate aspirations. Her polished demeanor, her ambition, had been stripped away, leaving her exposed and struggling. Paul Miller's story was equally grim. His financial empire had crumbled. The lawsuits from his wife, the investigations from the business watchdog, all tearing at the foundations. His family was torn apart, his reputation irrevocably tainted. He was, effectively, a ruined man. I observed their downfall from a distance, a grim spectator. The quiet satisfaction that had fueled my actions for months had now given way to a profound weariness, an emptiness that resonated in the hollow spaces of the house. I began to sell off my possessions. The fishing boat, the old Ford pickup, even the hunting rifle, the very tool I had cleaned and focused on at the start of all this. Each item sold felt like shedding a layer of my past, a quiet ritual of detachment. The cottage, once a sanctuary, now felt like a tomb of memories, each corner holding an echo of what had been lost. I put it up for sale. Susan, ever observant, stopped by one afternoon as I stacked boxes onto a moving truck. "Are you leaving, Roy?" she asked, her voice tinged with sadness. "It won't be the same without you." I nodded, pausing to wipe sweat from my brow. "Yeah, Susan, I am. I need a fresh start." Shh. The words, simple and true, felt heavy with unspoken baggage. Before I left, I drove to the small cemetery on the edge of town, where my parents lay beneath a weathered granite stone. I stood there silent, seeking a counsel they could no longer offer. I thought of their simple values, their honest lives, the quiet love they had shared. I wondered what they would think of the man I had become, the path I had chosen. I realized my pursuit of retribution had consumed me, leaving me just as broken, just as empty as I had been before. The anger had burned itself out, leaving only ash. What have I become? I muttered to the still air, the question hanging unanswered. The scar near my eye, a jagged line from a distant war, throbbed faintly, a physical manifestation of the deeper, emotional wounds that still hadn't healed. I wondered if I had paid a higher price for my revenge than Brenda or Paul had for their betrayal. They had lost everything, but I had lost something too, something intangible, a part of myself I might never get back. Jed's words echoed in my mind, a gravelly whisper. "Revenge is a dish best served cold, but it doesn't warm your soul." He had been right. It left you colder. I saw a young couple walking hand in hand down Main Street, laughing, their faces bright with an easy, uncomplicated joy. A pang of regret, sharp and sudden, pierced through me. It wasn't just for Brenda's betrayal or the marriage that died. It was for the simple, honest love I had believed in, the future I had envisioned, the quiet life that was now irrevocably shattered. I packed a small bag, the essentials for the road. The truck was loaded. I climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway for the last time. Harvest Hills receded in the rearview mirror, shrinking with every mile. I didn't look back. I was searching for something new, something undefined, a path that might eventually lead to peace. The highway stretched out, endless and gray beneath the vast Midwestern sky. I drove for days, leaving the dust of Harvest Hills behind, crossing state lines until the landscape felt entirely new, unburdened by ghosts. I settled in a small, unassuming town, nestled beside a forgotten river, a place where no one knew my name or my past. I found a job working with my hands at a small lumber mill, the rhythmic thud of wood, the scent of pine, a grounding balm. It was simple, honest labor, demanding focus but leaving my mind free in a way it hadn't been in years. There was a quiet solace in the sawdust and sweat, The quiet, however, didn't erase the internal noise. I found a therapist in the next town over, a woman with kind eyes and a gentle voice. I started going week after week, slowly, painstakingly, unraveling the knots of past traumas, the military, the betrayals, and the more recent raw wounds of Brenda. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about healing. One evening I found an old sketchbook packed away, tucked beneath some forgotten military memorabilia, a forgotten hobby from my youth. I bought some pencils and began to draw again. The quiet landscapes around me, the river, the old mill, the way the light fell on the fields. It was a way to see the world, truly see it, without the lens of anger or suspicion. I met Clara at the local diner. She worked there, her smile soft, her eyes crinkling at the corners when she laughed. Our interactions were hesitant at first, small talk over coffee refills, then longer conversations about the weather, the town. She was kind, unassuming, and asked nothing of me. Slowly, carefully, I began to open up, sharing fragments of my past. I spoke of the loneliness, the pain of betrayal, the loss of a life I thought I had built. I omitted the details of my retribution, the deliberate dismantling of lives. Some truths, I decided, were mine to carry alone. Clara listened. She didn't offer advice or judgment, just a quiet understanding that felt like a gentle rain after a long drought. "Everyone has a story, Roy," she said one afternoon, refilling my coffee cup, her gaze steady. "It's what you do with it that matters." An unexpected letter arrived, a simple postcard showing a quaint Harvest Hills covered bridge. It was from Susan. "Hope you're doing well, Roy," it read. "Things aren't the same here. We miss you." A small, unexpected flicker of warmth spread through me. I sometimes considered reaching out to Brenda, not for reconciliation, but for a final, quiet peace, a way to close that door completely. But then I realized it was already closed. What more was there to say? I found myself forgiving myself for the anger, the rage, the precise acts of retribution. It was what I had to do then, I admitted to myself, the words no longer carrying the weight of accusation, but of simple fact. I had survived in my own way. I started visiting a quiet, unassuming church, not for religion, but for the serenity of the space, the stained glass light, the peaceful hush. I sat in the back reflecting on morality, on second chances, on the elusive nature of peace. True strength, I was beginning to understand, lay not in vengeance, but in rebuilding, in finding new purpose, in embracing the possibility of a future free from the shadow of betrayal. The scar near my eye was still there, a thin white line against my skin. It was no longer a fresh wound, no longer a symbol of constant pain or a driver of my actions. It was just a part of my story, a quiet reminder of where I had been. I allowed myself to feel hope again, a cautious, Midwestern kind of hope, a quiet dawn. I looked out at the new horizon, the sun rising over unfamiliar fields, casting long, peaceful shadows. I was ready.